In the autumn of 1929, America was on fire with dreams of endless prosperity. The air crackled with the energy of a nation that believed it had conquered poverty itself. Stock prices soared to unimaginable heights, skyscrapers stretched toward the heavens, and the word millionaire became almost ordinary. But behind the champagne bubbles and ticker tape, one man was quietly tightening the noose around the nation's throat. Charles E. Sunshine Mitchell, the charming, well-dressed head of National City Bank, the most powerful financial institution in the United States. And what he did would not only shatter the dreams of millions, but help unleash the Great Depression, the worst economic disaster in modern history. Before we dive deep into how one banker brought America to its knees, make sure you subscribe to Blood and Fortune, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about greed. It's a story about how the modern financial system was built on lies, manipulation, and a playbook that bankers still follow today. Stay till the end, because the way Mitchell escaped justice will leave you stunned. And when you're done, drop a comment below. Do you think the 2008 crisis was really any different? Now let's go back to where it all began. In the Roaring '20s, Charles Mitchell wasn't just a banker. He was a celebrity. Newspapers called him Sunshine Charlie because of his disarming smile and relentless optimism. While other bankers sat in dark offices counting coins, Mitchell was on the front pages, flying his private plane, hosting extravagant parties, and promising that everyone, from teachers to farmers, could get rich through the stock market. He wasn't selling investments, he was selling the American dream itself. Under Mitchell, National City Bank transformed from a conservative institution into a profit-hungry machine. He created the National City Company, a 350-person army of salesmen trained to push stocks and bonds onto ordinary Americans, most of whom had no idea what they were buying. These weren't cautious investors. They were widows, veterans, and schoolteachers. People who believed that if the biggest bank in America was offering them shares, it had to be safe. What they didn't know was that Mitchell's empire was built on deception. He turned banking into a sales circus. His agents flooded towns across America, holding investment luncheons and promising small investors they could become part of the booming financial elite. In reality, Mitchell was dumping bad securities, risky corporate bonds and overvalued stocks to the very people who trusted him most. National City Bank's slogan was, "A bank for the people." But behind the smiling ads, Mitchell was offloading toxic assets onto the public, protecting his own balance sheets and inflating the bubble further. Mitchell's influence reached all the way to the top of Wall Street. When the Federal Reserve tried to cool speculation by raising interest rates, he personally fought back, declaring publicly that the Fed was wrong, that America was in a new era of prosperity. Those words ignited a frenzy. People borrowed money they didn't have to buy stocks they didn't understand. And through it all, National City Bank kept lending, pushing, and profiting. By mid-1929, the market had become a ticking bomb. Over $10 billion in margin loans were floating through the system, credit that depended on stock prices never falling. But they would fall, harder than anyone could imagine. In late October 1929, the panic began. Stocks that had seemed unstoppable collapsed in hours. Crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange, their faces pale with disbelief. Banks tried to calm the storm, but it was too late. The machine Mitchell built was feeding on itself. As margin calls went out, small investors lost everything. The crash wiped out $30 billion in market value, roughly the entire US GDP of the time. And where was Sunshine Charlie? Calmly retreating to his estate, untouched by the storm he created. The irony was brutal. The man who had promised America eternal sunshine had plunged it into darkness. He testified before Congress, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. And technically, he hadn't broken any laws because there were no laws against what he'd done. His schemes were perfectly legal in an era before the SEC, before banking regulation, before anyone understood how dangerous unrestrained speculation could be. But make no mistake, Mitchell's fingerprints were all over the disaster. National City Bank had fueled the bubble, profited from the mania, and then shielded itself while millions of Americans were destroyed. The crash didn't just end the Roaring '20s, it ended trust in the financial system itself. People realized the game was rigged, and it had been rigged from the start. Yet despite the wreckage, Mitchell faced no prison time, no fines, no accountability. The government moved slowly, the laws were weak, and the outrage of the public eventually faded into exhaustion. In the ashes of the Great Depression, ordinary families starved. But Sunshine Charlie still had his mansion, his fortune, and his smile. But that's only the beginning. Because what Mitchell did next would prove that he didn't just survive the crash, he profited from it. He showed the world that if you're powerful enough, you can not only get away with destroying an economy, but you can also come out richer on the other side. This part of the story is even more shocking. So stick around. In the months following the 1929 crash, the United States was a nation in mourning. The ticker tape had stopped, but the sound of lives collapsing echoed everywhere. Bankruptcies, foreclosures, breadlines stretching for miles. Men who'd once worn silk ties now stood in soup kitchens. Women pawned wedding rings for food. The dream was dead. But one man who had helped build that dream and destroy it refused to admit defeat. Charles E. Sunshine. Mitchell, the smiling face of National City Bank, didn't just survive the crash. He reinvented himself. While millions of Americans were digging through trash for food, Mitchell was quietly meeting with other Wall Street executives behind closed mahogany doors. His goal, to rebuild confidence, not in the economy but in himself. The same newspapers that had celebrated him as the architect of prosperity were now calling for his head. He had become the most hated man in America. But Mitchell understood something crucial. Public outrage fades faster than economic memory. If he could outlast the storm, he could outlive the blame. He started by reshaping his image. He gave speeches about American resilience, donated small fortunes to charity, and appeared at public events promising a brighter financial tomorrow. To a desperate public, his confidence felt reassuring. People wanted to believe that recovery was possible, and Mitchell gave them a face to pin their hope on. What they didn't know was that behind his polished image, he was quietly working to protect the empire he'd built before the crash. National City Bank, today known as Citibank, was in chaos. Its investments had imploded and public trust was gone. But Mitchell refused to let it die. He worked frantically to restructure debt, hide losses, and move bad assets off the books. He even used complex accounting tricks, transferring failing securities between internal divisions to make the bank appear stable. In modern terms, he was cooking the books. But again, it wasn't illegal. America had no rules for what was happening. Mitchell and men like him were writing those rules as they went. By 1930, unemployment had doubled. The stock market continued to plummet. But in Washington, politicians and bankers were too intertwined to act decisively. The Federal Reserve hesitated, terrified of spooking investors further. So the banks, led by Mitchell, began self-policing, or rather pretending to. Committees were formed, reports were written, public statements were made, and each one of them pointed the blame somewhere else. Small investors, bad luck, international trade, or even psychological panic. Never the banks, never the men who'd caused it. It was a masterclass in misdirection. By 1931, as the Great Depression deepened, National City Bank had become both symbol and scapegoat for Wall Street's sins. Investigators from the Senate's Pecora Commission began digging into its practices, and what they uncovered was staggering. National City had knowingly sold junk securities to the public while offloading risky debt onto its own depositors. The bank's executives had borrowed millions to buy their own stock, inflating prices, and then dumped those shares before the crash. When Mitchell was called to testify before Congress, the nation tuned in. Americans crowded around radios and newspapers. They wanted justice. They wanted to see the man who'd ruined them brought to his knees. But when Sunshine Charlie took the stand, he did what he'd always done best. He smiled. He was calm, polite, and impossibly confident. He denied everything, brushed off accusations, and delivered lines like a movie star. His charm disarmed even the toughest interrogators. When asked if he'd profited during the collapse, he answered smoothly, "Gentlemen, I merely did what any prudent businessman would do." And he walked free. Not because he was innocent, but because the system had no tools to punish him. There were no securities laws, no financial oversight, no FDIC, no SEC, no real regulation. Men like Mitchell operated in a lawless paradise of capitalism, and though the public seethed with anger, the law simply had no teeth to bite him. But karma, as it often does, came quietly. In 1933, the Pecora hearings intensified. Investigators uncovered that Mitchell had evaded over $800,000 in taxes, an astronomical sum in Depression-era America. Finally, they had something tangible. He was arrested and charged with tax evasion, the same way they'd eventually get Al Capone. The press rejoiced. "Sunshine Charlie finally faces justice," screamed the headlines. Except, justice was an illusion. Mitchell's trial was slow, technical, and strangely civil. Wealthy friends and powerful allies came to his defense. Lawyers argued that his tax avoidance was simply poor accounting, not criminal intent. After months of proceedings, he was convicted, but spared prison. Instead, he paid a fine and quietly moved to Europe, where he continued advising banks and managing private investments. He lived comfortably until his death in 1955, unpunished and largely forgotten. The same could not be said for the millions who lost everything. By 1933, unemployment hit 25%. Children went hungry. Families slept under bridges. The Dust Bowl swept through the heartland, turning farms to wastelands. Men like Mitchell had escaped, but America was broken, socially, financially, and psychologically. And yet, even in its ruin, the system rebuilt itself in his image. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal reforms, including the creation of the SEC, Glass-Steagall Act, and FDIC insurance, were designed to prevent another Mitchell from ever happening again. They split banks apart, restricted speculation, and enforced transparency. For a moment, it seemed like the age of financial predators was over. But the irony is, Mitchell's legacy lived on within those reforms. The mechanisms he created, the aggressive sales tactics, the too-big-to-fail philosophy, the creative accounting, became the DNA of modern finance. Every generation since has seen a new version of Sunshine Charlie. In 1987, it was the junk bond kings. In 2008, it was the mortgage traders. Different names, same playbook. Promise endless profit, exploit public trust, cash out before the crash. And every time, the world asks the same question. How did we let this happen again? The truth is simple, because it works, because greed never dies. Mitchell once said, "A banker's job is to sell confidence," and in that, he succeeded, spectacularly. He sold confidence until it became currency itself, until America was addicted to it. And even after his empire crumbled, that addiction remained. The idea that the market would always rise, that the bankers knew best, that you could trust the smile behind the suit. Sunshine Charlie Mitchell didn't just cause a crash. He wrote the script for the financial world we still live in, a world where illusion is profit, accountability is optional, and history, no matter how devastating, keeps repeating itself.